We see ADHD and autism as a language of difference, not of a disorder. The D should be for difference. The difference in your brain means you have to approach things differently. There are many people who have ADHD. If we were to do genetic testing, you probably wouldn't find something. There is no gene that causes ADHD. There are a handful of genes that have been identified that say if they are faulty or don't necessarily work in the same way as they should be working, you have an increased susceptibility of then developing ADHD.
Genes load the gun and environment pulls the trigger when it comes to developing ADHD. Is it possible to develop ADHD without being born with that loaded gun?
It's a really good question. When families come to see me,
Loyal listeners and viewers, I can't thank you enough for tuning in to ADHD Chatter, where we ask world-leading ADHD experts the hard questions to give you access to the most cutting-edge information on the topic. If you've ever felt broken or different, I hope this helps in your search for information, answers, and community. And do you know what would really help me in return? By clicking the follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening. It might not seem like much, but at ADHD Chatter, it means a huge deal. And with this, I can book more incredible guests and keep the self-discovery fire alive for all of us, including myself. Just one click of a button goes a lot further than you think. We'll promise to listen to your feedback and book the guests you want on topics that matter to you. And remember, you're not broken, just different, and you have always been enough. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like this episode is going to be really therapeutic for me as someone who felt very different when they were younger, as a child growing up, feeling very misunderstood. I think when I started this podcast, I said I wish I could have gone back in time to put my arms around the younger version of myself, to reassure him that he's not broken, just different, and that he has always been enough. But of course, I'm not able to do that. But the thing I can do is speak to people like yourself in the hopes that a younger version of me does hear something that triggers their journey of understanding earlier than I did. So on behalf of the younger version of me, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. That's a really nice reflection. I think a lot of adults feel exactly the same. And if we can help at all, that's our job.
Just to kick things off, Dan, what is your mission in the world of ADHD?
That's a really good question. So I'm a consultant clinical psychologist, and the job of a psychologist is to understand, to find out what's going on and why it's happening. Because particularly in ADHD, there is a distinct lack of understanding and a lack of knowing what's going on. It's misunderstood, it's misrepresented, people see what's on the surface, not necessarily what's underneath. The example that I often use is that of an iceberg. So if you imagine like an iceberg, what you see on top of the water is the visible bit of an iceberg, and that's the bit that is obvious and what we see, and that's what we talk about, and that's what's there. But the psychologist wants to understand what's going on beneath the water, and with an iceberg, there's a huge amount going on underneath. That's the stuff that isn't directly obvious. That's what's hidden away, and my job is to try to understand that. And if we can do that and share that with parents and teachers and educators and professionals, the amount of support that we can offer is great.
Just following on from that iceberg analogy, which I totally relate to, what traits and personality features or aspects of someone do you think would be above the water?
The things above the water are the things that we directly see, which funnily enough is more the case in boys. Not always, but often is the case. It's the stuff that is externalized. So that's the visible part of behavior. Things that you do, things that you say, the way that you move. So your activity levels, your impulsivity, so the things that come out of your mouth or the things that you do, the interactions that you have, anything that is visible is what is above the water. That's the stuff that, because we can see it, people think that's where the problem is, and that's where the attention goes. I want to be thinking what's underneath the stuff that's hidden. That's the stuff that looks at family background and behind the scenes, reading between the lines, and the stuff that is harder to interpret.
What about shame? Would that be something that's below the water?
The feeling of it would absolutely be below the water. The emotion of it might then show itself. But yeah, absolutely, it is feelings and emotions and where those emotions come from. You don't just one day feel shame. It's built up over time, and it can appear in a very obvious way. But it's the background stuff. How do we get to that point, that the hidden stuff that is driving it, that's really important.
If someone's coming to you and they want to explore their life, whether it's themselves or their kids, and they want to understand what is below the water, what would you say is a sign of a good psychologist, someone who really understands how to look below the water?
Yeah. By not doing what comes naturally, which is a really weird place to be. So the natural response is to respond to exactly what you see in front of us. So if your child is behaving in a certain way, they're a bit active, they're a bit impulsive, they are responding in ways that you as a parent might not necessarily approve of, we go straight to that. Don't do that. Stop doing this. Don't shout. Oh, you're terrible. And it's that's the response. I do it as a parent all the time. I say, don't do it. That's not the way it's going to help. But that's what we see, and that's what we respond to. It's about taking that step back. How do you put a pause on things? How do you take a step back and see what's happening and why it's happening? So the line that I often say to many families is, every behavior, everything that you see above that water is an expression of something. So it's a communication of some type. I'm tired, I'm bored, I'm in pain, I don't like it, whatever it might be. But we're talking about children who don't necessarily have the words of, I'm tired, I'm in pain, I'm bored. So it comes out through behavior. So we have to stop that initial intuitive response, which is clamp down on the behavior, take a step back and understand it, so that we're then in a much better place to focus underneath the waterline.
If someone's at that age where they have not developed language yet and they don't know how to express emotions, how does that person feel things like shame, things like RSD?
Not in the way that we as adults would feel. So in terms of, emotions are a really powerful one. Shame, regret, disappointment, all of those sort of strong feelings, we as adults can sit here and try to talk it through. Like, we can sit in a nice calm place, explore those feelings, think about it and talk about it and put words to it. You are never going to sit down with an 8-year-old and think about the feeling of shame and how you came about that and the impact on other people. You might comment on it, but you're never going to get more than a quick conversation before your child is then off wanting to do more interesting things, Minecraft or whatever it might be. So you have to find more creative ways of exploring it, but it's going to come out from that child through their behavior, through their actions, through the things that they do or the things that they interact with or the way they respond in certain ways. Now, and they'll express that at home, they'll express it at school, they'll express it out and about. We have to try and understand why that behavior is happening. And we can do that as parents. We can take a step back and sit and try and think about it. It's much harder in a structured environment like school. If you are feeling shame of some sort, you've got no way of expressing it, or you find it hard to express it. How on earth are you going to be able to express that healthily through difficulty? So it's going to come out through your behavior, the way you interact with your peers, the way that you interact with schoolwork. It's tricky.
I think I remember my first feeling of, it was either RSD or it was justice sensitivity. I was about 6 years old, boiling hot day at school. The mud was really dry and everyone was having fun digging in the mud. And I thought, what could I do to make this task easier, make digging in the mud easier? So my parents were having some work done on their house at the time. I found this box of nails. I brought this box of nails into school. And I suggested to all the other kids, like, we can use the nails to help us dig in the dry mud to make it easier. Someone cut themselves. There was blood everywhere. And the teacher said, who brought these nails in? And I said, I brought the nails in. And they called my parents in and I had a meeting with them. I remember the teacher called me stupid. And objectively, as an adult now, I can look back on that and see how dangerous that was, me bringing nails into a school. But at the time, I remember after the meeting and my parents went home, I went off to a quiet area in the playground, into a corner on my own. And I remember the rage. Like, I remember feeling this rage inside me. And I isolated myself and I just sat with the anger. And that's a core memory that I have. Do you think that feeling is a response to the injustice of the situation, i.e. my intentions being misrepresented by that teacher, or do you think it was an RSD trigger?
Mm-hmm. Or both. Or, I mean, that is the perfect demonstration of the iceberg of what we're talking about. What is seen on the surface is awful child brings in dangerous nails and is a danger to society. But that's what it looks like. But that's in no way was there any form of malicious intent from your side. In fact, all you wanted to do was help, and you found quite a creative way of helping. Okay, not the most effective way of helping, but you certainly didn't think anything other than this is going to be great for lots of people. And you got in a huge amount of trouble for that. And if you imagine that then happening day after day after day, and then slowly the perspective of other people around start to expect that behavior of you. So you start to become thought of, here's the kid who's going to cause problems again. Oh my gosh, look what's happened. If there's a problem at school, I guess who's going to be involved. That sort of narrative, you're absolutely going to feel those emotions, be it the rejection, be it the shame, be it any form of emotion without necessarily the way of expressing it, surrounded by people who don't understand it. That can be extremely traumatizing for children. And if you say it's a core memory, I have absolutely no doubt that it probably was, because the injustice of that whole set of circumstances is terrible.
It broke my heart recently when I put out a poll to the viewers and the listeners of this show. What word would you describe your lived experience? And sadly, the most common answer was broken, which was devastating. And it made me think, because that's certainly how I felt for many years. What traits of ADHD do you think are not accepted by the modern world? And therefore, if someone goes through their life with that trait, would potentially lead to a feeling of being broken.
Yeah. That's really sad, isn't it? Really sad. I feel it's even more so because that's entirely avoidable. And we shouldn't have to feel like that. But that, I think, is because the system, in inverted commas, is not set up for neurodivergent children. The system works for most people. And when I say the system, I'm talking about everyday life here. The way the mainstream schools are set up, and of course there are exceptions. I'm not denying that for one moment. But the majority of schools are set up for the majority of pupils, which for the majority works. But for those children who struggle with that, they just cannot access it. And if you can't access it, you then struggle against it, yet being told that you're struggling against it because you are the problem. You are naughty. Your behavior above the iceberg. Like, what we see is not acceptable. You are responsible for this. Therefore, it's your fault. And you're given this message of you are the problem. That's going to break anybody. What an awful thing to have to experience. So we want to try to, we're working hard with schools to try to change that. I think that is changing. It absolutely is, but there is a long way to go with it.
I feel like if you are a child with ADHD and you are exposed to feeling different and feeling misunderstood, it's almost like you're going to potentially be an adult that is so desperate of other people's approval. And if you sense that approval is taken away, it could almost snap you back to the perhaps traumatic experiences of your childhood. And with that turbulent character, how that looks in romantic relationships, do you think?
I think there's a very strong relationship that is there. So you're touching on something that starts not just in experiences in being a child, even earlier than that. So there's a very significant theory. It's not a theory, it's reality. It's still known as a theory. It's called attachment theory, which essentially says your experiences from a very, very young age, so your earliest possible years, even before you are born, form your model of the world. And this is essentially your expectation of how the world is. So your experiences as a very young child tell you how people interact with you. It tells you what you can expect from relationships. It tells you how you expect the world to be. And it teaches you rules of the world. And what then happens is, as you continue to grow up, that that expectation, that model starts to solidify in your brain. So that then becomes your reality. So, and then you go through the rest of your life based on that reality of what you're experiencing. So if in your earliest years, you are given love and kindness and compassion and care and healthy relationships, when something goes wrong, you've got parents or support people to help you. That teaches you that sometimes things go wrong, but it's going to be okay. And that's what we call a secure attachment. But sometimes there are young children who develop insecure attachments, which is when you don't have that same relationship, which can sometimes mean if you're upset, you might get inconsistent care. So you might get a cuddle, but sometimes you might be ignored, sometimes you might be shouted at, and worse, sometimes you might be abused. And that teaches you that way of the world, it then becomes your normal. So then as you go through the rest of your life, that becomes your expectation. So if you have been brought up with an insecure attachment, yet find out that the world doesn't really work like that, you are forever fighting against it. And that idea is critical in ADHD, because it might not necessarily be about that earliest possible experiences, but it's your experiences that you have at school that form your understanding of how the world is. And so if you are taught that you are going to be shouted at or scapegoated or blamed, then that's what's going to become of your expectation of the rest of the world as you grow up. It doesn't have to be, but that's often a pattern that we find. And so you then go into adulthood and develop intimate relationships. Sometimes that then causes a real conflict, because especially if you have someone who's not necessarily as understanding of you as you might need, all of your early experiences then come to dominate that relationship. Again, not always, but that's the general pattern that we often see. Meeting someone who gets you and understands you and is on your wavelength and can support you when you need and be there when things are going great, but understand when you're having a tricky time, means that you can have an exceptionally happy life. There's no reason why you shouldn't have that. But we have to consider it in your relationships as you grow up.
You said sometimes your attachment style can be determined pre-birth. Does that mean there's a genetic component?
Yes, there does. So a lot of work has been done into this. And now there is no gene that causes ADHD. So it's not like there's one specific gene, and if you have that or you don't have that, you're going to have ADHD. But there are a handful of genes that have been identified that say if they are faulty or don't necessarily work in the same way as they should be working, you have an increased susceptibility of then developing ADHD. There's one gene. Now, I'm a psychologist, not a medic, so I'm hoping not to butcher this explanation of it. But I do know of one gene called the DAT1 gene, the DAT1 gene. It's a dopamine transporter gene, which I had to Google what that actually means. But essentially, in your brain, when two neurons connect to each other, there is a gap between them called the synapse. And in there builds up dopamine. And this DAT1 gene is responsible for clearing that dopamine through that gap. I mean, our brains do amazing things. This is all happening without us even knowing. But if you have a faulty gene, it means it can build up in that gap, which can then potentially lead to increased displays of what we see in ADHD.
Sure.
Now, what we do know is that there is a very strong link between that gene and mothers who drink during pregnancy. So that gene is expressed more in mums who drink during pregnancy. And so what we see there is a genetic component, but there is absolutely an environmental cause that can almost trigger or show off that gene in more detail. That's our understanding of how ADHD works. There might be sort of a genetic basis to it, but there has to come an environmental factor alongside it to help to develop that expression of it. And that's why I believe the support that we put into place for ADHD is not just that of a medication to change the biology, but it's the environmental side and to develop that side, because there's a lot of nurture to it as well, not just the nature side of things.
We had a guest on, following on from that, who said that genes load the gun and environment pulls the trigger when it comes to developing ADHD. Do you agree with that? And if is it possible to develop ADHD without being born with that loaded gun?
Now, You see, I knew I'd butcher it because that is a much clearer explanation of exactly how it works. Yeah, absolutely. What a brilliant visual description. And that's absolutely right. Now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be the way. There are many people who have ADHD. If we were to do genetic testing, you probably wouldn't find something. You might do. I don't know, but I don't think that has to be the only way, because it's the world around you and the expression of it that is exceptionally important. Look, you're talking to a psychologist here. I'm interested in how the world works and how we respond to each other, not necessarily the biology of it, although it is an important factor.
Do you see a common attachment style with those who have ADHD?
Now, that is a really good question. I work predominantly with children. So that might not have expressed itself just yet. So working with children, you do a lot of work with parents and supporting parents to then support their children, or supporting teachers to support their pupils. And we don't necessarily get to that detail. I would expect that would form a significant part of support for adults. Absolutely. And I believe it probably should do. If we want to go down that route, it's like Pandora's box. Do we really want to open this? Do we really want to explore this? But sometimes if you struggle to hold down relationships or manage employment, or just find the world too difficult to manage, maybe actually exploring it could be really helpful. And going back to your earliest years, I think, is a significant part of that exploration. And this is why therapy, psychological therapy, is difficult. It's exposing. You know, we're going back to things that we probably don't even think are things, but are important to consider, definitely.
I think with relationships, for me, RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, has been such a catalyst for chaos and destruction in the past. And ultimately, I think why relationships and friendships have buckled and failed. And knowing the people who listen to this podcast, I know how prevalent RSD is with them too. Do you have any theories as to what RSD is, what causes it, where it comes from?
I would like to... I don't think we can solely attribute this to ADHD. I think that is a predominant driver of it, absolutely. But I think we do need to look at wider pictures, under the surface stuff again. So that starts with that earliest possible attachment. I think that is a really important part of it. Again, I really want to emphasize the point that we're talking generally here. So some of the things that we say don't necessarily apply to some people, but we know that if we take a step back and scale this across the whole ADHD world, it's a general pattern that we see. So the way that we are brought up, the experiences that we have at home, your example of the experience with nails and being in the playground, all forms part of you. I sort of imagine it a bit like a bucket, or like a vessel, in a way that you have buckets. The one I use with children is much nicer words than a vessel. But it's essentially the things that you have with you and that you carry around with you, but you don't even know you're carrying it with you. And it's things that have happened in your life. And again, sometimes there are things in there that you don't even know are things. And your experiences build up and up and up. And sometimes there then becomes an event, something big that then allows all that previous stuff to then express itself. So you might be going around perfectly well, holding your bucket, skipping around, thinking everything's absolutely fine. And then suddenly there is a trigger of something, and all that earlier stuff just comes pouring out. And that might show itself through RSD. It might show itself through difficult relationships. And that's where we sometimes see sabotaging things, people almost ruining things for themselves. Again, not purposefully, not maliciously, but get to a place where they find it really hard to deal with whatever that set of circumstances is because of all that stuff that's happened previously. So you don't just one day wake up and sabotage a relationship. It's a developmental thing that starts in childhood.
So interesting. For me, it's certainly like a self-preservation thing. When you realize how painful criticism and rejection is, you'll make the first move to reject someone else before they can reject you in relationships, for example. Or you'll in social situations, it'll turn you into a massive people pleaser.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be really scared of confrontation because the pain of any pushback or any retaliation is essentially a reminder of being disapproved. And putting everyone else's needs before your own. When I got my diagnosis 2 years ago, I think, I looked back and I could see it so clearly. And the shame actually lifted when I was able to look back throughout my past and add colour and context to 34 years of people pleasing and rejection avoidance.
A quick word from our sponsors to address a big ADHD issue, the notebook fallacy. We all convince ourselves that buying that one magic notebook will solve all of our problems, but it never does. Nor does the second one, or the third, or the 10th. Well, Tiimo app is more useful than having all the notebooks in the world. And what use are notebooks if you keep losing your pen anyway? Tiimo app has hugely helped me organize my chaotic life by offering the most user-friendly interface an organizational app has to offer. The difference is, it's designed by neurodiverse brains for neurodiverse brains. And you can tell, it's built to adapt to your neurodiverse way of thinking and be flexible to your way of planning. And now it's even more simple with the AI planning assistant. Tiimo now offers an incredible new voice transcribing service, making it even easier to use. A simple voice prompt when you have to plan something or something pops into your mind, and the new AI planning assistant hears it and transcribes it instantly into an easily digestible list of instructions for you to remember. Tiimo is here to help you simplify planning, build focus, and make life happen. No more decision paralysis. The new AI planning assistant makes it so quick and easy to insert information, you can do it before you've forgotten or been distracted. Give it a go and use the link in my bio for 30% off. Just a note though, this code is only applicable on the web browser, not on the smartphone. Then, when Tiimo solves all of your problems, go ahead and use your notebooks for something useful, like propping up a wobbly table leg or mopping up a spilt coffee. Back to the episode.
How important do you think it is for someone to receive a diagnosis? What knock-on effects positively can that have to someone's mental health?
I think you've just explained it exceptionally eloquently. So it can provide a meaning. It can provide an understanding as to why things have been difficult or things have been hard or why you have certain character traits. When you were talking, you reminded me of an example with a family recently. We were talking about sharing. And sharing is something that is very commonly misunderstood from a parenting point of view. So let's say there's two kids playing, in a soft play and just happily getting on with their own thing. And one child has this super cool, funky toy and the other child wants it. What often we see is the parent of the child with the toy says, share with Jimmy or whatever it is. Now that isn't sharing. That's giving your things away to someone else because someone else wants it. That's not a healthy message to be teaching to children. Now, we all do it. That's the natural thing. We all want to generally help out and make sure no children feel upset. But that's not a good message that we're giving to our children. And that's essentially teaching you people pleasing. Like, you just want other people to be happy. So give them things and they'll be happy. But whilst it teaches the child with the toy to be a people pleaser, it also teaches the child who gets the things to expect from other people. So they become expecting things. This is not a healthy dynamic. What we need to be teaching is when you finish with your toy, then you can share it with Jimmy. And that's a harder message to deal with, but psychologically the right one. Now, why on earth am I mentioning sharing? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be part of ADHD. It can be part of what we experience when we're younger. Now, the ADHD factors make that situation more difficult. Most certainly they do. But this is why taking a step back and trying to understand those behaviors from a psychological point of view can be exceptionally powerful. Because if you've experienced that as a child, the messages that you're being taught about the world are then very different already. That's before we're even thinking from an ADHD side of things. It's important to consider that element of it.
One of the biggest injustices, Dan, in this whole ADHD conversation is how let down women and girls have been in the whole landscape. And 85% of listeners and viewers of this podcast are women. A whole generation of women were missed and are almost playing catch up now in their understanding of self. But why do you think so many women and girls were missed for so long?
I'm delighted that you've mentioned this. It's sort of seen an explosion of interest recently and there is a really clear pattern of that being absolutely the case. Women and girls have been missed. There's a lot of ongoing research into it to try to answer it, but I wonder if there are three general explanations for it. The first one is the expression of ADHD and what that looks like, and we know there is a difference between boys and girls for that. The second is the historical perspective of what's happened. That's the looking back over time and how we've done research into ADHD. And then the third is that societal expectations, what we expect from boys and girls. And I think there's a mixture of all of these. But if we take the first one, for example, the expression, that goes back to what we were talking about with our iceberg. So what you see above the surface, that generally, again, not always, but generally is different for boys and girls. Boys traditionally is not the right word, typically might express things through their behavior. So you see lots of the outwardly expression, fidgeting, movement, shouting out, moving around, that sort of thing. So it's very externalized, whereas girls tend to have the opposite effect, where it's internalized, which is things like disorganization, finding it hard to concentrate. And that's very inward. Now, as a result, what tends to happen, teachers or parents see children see that above the surface of the waterline again. And so they're much quicker to concentrate on the boys with the challenges, not necessarily the girls. So it's easy for girls to be missed with that. Then you've got the societal expectations of it. And from a societal point of view, we are changing. We absolutely are. So I'm talking very generally here. But from a societal point of view, there are very different expressions of how boys and girls perform and what general roles might necessarily be. And I think we have lived in a society where girls are expected to sit and concentrate and do something with sitting and quietly, and whereas boys are more outgoing. Again, I'm talking very generally, and that is absolutely changing. But the expectation of what we see is absolutely part of it. And finally, you've got the historical side. And historically, understanding ADHD has been done on loud, busy boys. That's who the research group is. And so that's what we've come to expect of ADHD. And if you combine all three, you are in a position of thinking that's what ADHD looks like. The child who moves around and jumps and shouts and can't sit still. And that's not necessarily the presentation of girls. So I think combining them is why girls can be missed.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? I think, again, like you said, these things aren't exclusive to women, but it certainly seems to be a higher concentration within late diagnosed women, some of these lived experiences, that internalized hyperactivity, which you amazingly just described, and how those internalized, highly caffeinated squirrels that don't stop sometimes. Some days those can get so manic, and each squirrel pulling the person in a different direction, each one with a different idea, and the overwhelm that can create sometimes. And when you are physically paralyzed in a state of overwhelm, and in that moment you can't do anything other than lie on the sofa and scroll social media, because that's the only thing that's distracting you from that horrendous inner critic telling yourself that you're useless. And it's heartbreaking, because if someone is that person, the optics of that lying on the sofa, unable to move, exposes them to even further criticisms from colleagues, partners, friends. Why are you so lazy? Why can't you just start the task? And it perpetuates that inner critic. Or in relationships, that rejection, RSD we spoke about earlier. Why are you so sensitive? The comments that their behavior opens them up to sort of sets them off and perpetuates the inner critic that tells them that they are different.
Yeah.
With late diagnosed women, do you see a common thread of emotion when women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and onwards finally get a diagnosis?
So remember, I predominantly work with children, but if we think about that genetic component, children with ADHD are very likely to have parents who have a neurodivergence of some sort. And we meet many children who are going through the assessment for ADHD, and their parents have said that either they have been diagnosed as ADHD as a child or have recently found out that they are ADHD themselves or are going through their own assessment. And when we talk about that, which isn't necessarily a big part of our assessment process, but if we have the opportunity to talk about it, the overwhelming emotion is relief. Relief and an explanation and a sense of, finally, I have an explanation for why it was so difficult, because I was always told that I should be better, and I wanted to be better, and I tried to be better, but couldn't. And that's where our language comes from, which is the language of can't, not the language of won't. So we absolutely focus on things that you want to do but struggle to do it, rather than a defiance, like a behavioral, purposeful problem. And that shift. And finally, parents are feeling relief. And we see it absolutely in mums. Absolutely. That is crystal clear to me.
Do you see when a child gets diagnosed, do you see like a narrative or a story arc that starts with the parents maybe thinking there's nothing wrong with my child because I do that too, and then the child gets diagnosed, and then it sort of sets off that domino effect, and the parents realize, oh, maybe I also have ADHD?
Yeah. So it works the other way around as well. So parents who have been told to go for an ADHD assessment for some reason, and they go through the process, maybe a bit skeptical, not really sure if this is the right thing. And then as we start talking, you see this almost light bulb moment of parents going, I do that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, we're describing me. And this is what, and again, not always, but that pattern is there. And then it often finds that parents want to go and do their own assessments as well. One of the interesting parts of doing ADHD assessments is just to start the process, we have to battle through a narrative that's there, a societal narrative. So ADHD is still massively misunderstood. It is still, I believe, seen as a parenting problem. So because the majority of people who don't have ADHD see children who do have ADHD and say, they need a good slap around the face. I mean, we don't say that anymore. That might be what we're thinking. I remember going to a restaurant once, and this is before I had kids, and I'm sat there watching, and there's a family with kids with iPads, and I'm sat there going, there is no way that when my children will be at a restaurant, we will ever have iPads. Now, iPad, sit on your iPad, don't talk. Stay there. But like what we expect of children is that of good behavior and compliance. And when children don't do that, it is often because we often are quick to assume that it's because they are not being brought up appropriately. It's a parenting problem. And that's not fair. That's not fair. I would argue from experience that every parent is really trying. Yet there are parents out there who are trying the things that they've been told to try, and it's not working. And that's when it becomes a problem. Like, I'm doing everything we should be doing, but I'm still finding there are difficulties. And that's when assessments can come from. And that's when there can be that realization that parents might also find they've got differences themselves.
Speaking of iPads and mobile phones and generally tech in general, because when I speak in schools, I often speak to parents and I get asked, what's the ideal age for my child to have a mobile phone? And I don't know the answer. What do you think a mobile phone, technology, social media, technology, gadgets in hand, what effect can that have on a developing ADHD mind?
A very significant effect. And this is where Googling things can be very dangerous, because if you Google what's the appropriate age for a child to have a screen, you'll get all sorts of things. Like there's all psychological services, and the American Psychological Association is really significant with this. They've got lots of guidance that say no child should have a screen before the age of 2. And if you sort of follow that all the way through life, you'll see guidance and steps and steps and steps. These are, and when your life doesn't fit into that, you can't help but think, I'm the problem. I'm trying, but the guidance says do this. It doesn't work. I need to have a screen, or I need a bit of a different approach. But the professional guidance says you're doing it wrong. And that's a great way to feel like you're making a terrible hash of parenting. Whereas actually you're trying exceptionally hard to do what is right. And sometimes, particularly neurodivergent children, a screen is actually the one thing that helps regulate them. And they need it. And if we think of an autistic brain and an ADHD brain, the real world is difficult to navigate, really difficult to navigate. And in the online space, you get rid of all of that. You can be who you want to be without all of the social pressures, without the societal expectations, doing the things that you want to do. So that pressure is immediately released. And then on top of it, let's think about what happens when you're on a computer. You've probably met many children who can do stuff on a computer or an iPad or something that we couldn't have even dreamed of. Like, how on earth do you know what to do with this? Children are really competent with technology. So now, if we think of a child with autism and or ADHD, you've got an online world that makes sense, and there is a competence to it. So that is going to be the world that they want to engage with. Yet screens and technology are the one area that we as parents crack down on the most. Get off your screen. You've been on it for hours. Get outside, and all that side of it. That can be really conflicting and really difficult. So I'm not a psychologist who opts for banning things because I don't think it's helpful. But I do things with guidance and being careful. So when it comes to screens, if we are allowing children to access technology, do it safely and gently with boundaries, is much of a healthier way to develop a positive relationship with technology.
I feel like social media is such a valuable tool on one hand, because whatever your special interest is, whatever your obsession, whatever your hobby is, like, there's free education and access to information on that thing, and you can just lose hours, days, and you're able to become incredibly good at that thing because there's this source of education available to you. But on the other hand, I feel like social media is so toxic to everybody because of comparison. We're able to see so many other people and compare our lives to their life. And I imagine that's heightened the consequences of comparison in a child that already feels different, and without social media probably wouldn't have optics into so many other fields of people's lives, therefore perpetuating that feeling of being different. Do you think there is a link between mobile phones, social media, ADHD, neurodivergence, and feeling depressed?
Yes. I am very confident that there is a link that is there. Now, that's not to say if you use a phone, you will become depressed. I'm not saying that. But the chances of struggling increase when you use technology, particularly social media, more. There was a recent study that was done. So there was a whole argument that social media is bad for you. It's terrible, don't go on, it's bad for your mental health. And a recent meta-analysis, which is essentially an analysis of all the research. So it's seen from a psychological literature point of view, the highest standard of research, because you are essentially looking at all the research and summarizing that. And a massive meta-analysis found that social media does not cause depression and anxiety. But what it does do is it stops you from then going outside and doing the other things that we know are beneficial for your well-being. So if you are using technology more, you might find that helpful or regulating or whatever it might be, but you are not then doing the things that we know are super helpful for you. Fresh air, walking with a dog, being on a bike, climbing a mountain, whatever you might be interested in. So that is... that social media can get a bad reputation from that side of things. However, the things that you alluded to are exceptionally important, because what young people in particular are accessing 24 hours a day is really harmful, because it's, or has the potential, to be really harmful, because they are seeing things that they shouldn't necessarily have to see, being exposed to things that might not necessarily be age appropriate, and then being drawn into that world without them knowing that they're being drawn into that world. So many psychologists view social media in the same way that we view addiction. And we use the same psychological models, the same psychological ideas. And that's often why if you ask a child to come off technology, remember we were talking about competence and feeling safe in that space. But when you ask children to come off technology, you very rarely see a child going, okay, Dad, yes, here's my iPad. I'll hand it back and now go to bed. Like, that's not going to happen. You're going to get, just 1 more minute. 5 more minutes. I need to do this. I imagine that's a very common experience, but if we view that from an addiction point of view, that's exactly what's going on. You want more. You're seeking out more. And we know it makes children feel good. They want more of it. So we as parents have to try and intervene and support with that.
Can that addiction to mobile phones, social media, can that change someone's default level of dopamine? And therefore, if they get that social media, that mobile phone taken away from them, like you've alluded to, can we see increased levels of irritability?
Absolutely, we can. So dopamine is a massive part of this. Dopamine is that chemical that makes you feel good. And we know you get that from doing things really well. When you've achieved something, you've won something, you've done a superstar job, you are boosted with dopamine. And the nice thing about it is it lasts. So that feeling lasts for a long time. When you're struggling with things and you are lacking dopamine, your body craves dopamine. You want more of it. And what is the cheapest, fastest, quickest way to get dopamine? Well, it's junk food being one, biscuits, crisps, chocolates, screens and technology. And if we sort of see what older teenagers do, that's more risk-taking behaviors and doing things that give them that thrill and that buzz. That is simply them wanting to seek out that dopamine. The difference here is that dopamine hasn't been earned. And if it's not earned, it disappears almost immediately. And look, I'm going to talk from a very personal point of view here. I can sit with a bag of Maltesers and finish it, and it was delicious, and I'm full of dopamine, and within seconds it is gone. So what do I want? More Maltesers. When? Now. And that's that seeking out more all the time is exactly what we see. So if we use that for children with screens, that's exactly what's happening. It's giving them that boost. But if we frame this in terms of addiction, there is a tolerance in addiction. The more you use a certain substance, the more you become used to it. So you have to use more of it to get the same feeling. And that's exactly what we see with screens. You know, an initial scroll on something might make you feel great, but the next time you do it, you need that bit more. And then you need that bit more. And you can see it's becoming increasingly challenging.
We had a guest who said similar, a neuroscientist called TJ Power. He explained, similar to what you just said, the difference between effort-based dopamine and non-effort-based dopamine, and the importance of, if you can, starting your day with effort-based dopamine. Like, it's so easy to wake up and grab your mobile phone and get that non-effort-based dopamine from just putting zero effort into getting that funny video of that cat. But effort-based dopamine comes from a small task like making the bed or brushing your teeth. You know, it's just set your much higher quality, longer lasting dopamine. How young could someone be when they first become addicted to something, do you think?
Oh, great question. I'd say from a very young age, especially if it gives them a reward from it. I wouldn't necessarily use the word addiction, but I would say it gives them a sense of achievement. So we know that one of the most effective ways of parenting is something called positive reinforcement. You know, when something good happens, you comment on it, you praise it, and you are essentially, as a parent, saying, I approve of this. And that is really effective. It's massively more effective than the opposite, which is sometimes commenting on how terrible a behavior is. So if we don't like a child doing something, we are, stop doing this, why are you doing that? But what you're actually doing is you're giving positive reinforcement with your attention. So you are giving your attention to the wrong behaviors. So if we can give loads of attention to something, that's a brilliant step to take. However, you have to do that carefully, because if you constantly praise and constantly give and constantly provide more, your children are then going to expect more and expect that. And you could argue that that's an addiction. I'm addicted to praise and then they get to school and suddenly not praised and find that exceptionally overwhelming, whereas actually they've just been brought up in a very praiseful household. So they just need still praise, absolutely praise, but gently.
Truly fascinating, Dan. This has been so insightful. Before I get on to the ADHD agony aunt section, which is often my favorite part of the show, just one final question to finish. And that's, when you finish a day as a psychologist assessing people for ADHD, and say you've had a very intense day assessing many people, what optimistic feeling about the community, about being ADHD, do you end your day with?
What a lovely question. It's lovely because psychologists are, by their very nature, are supposed to be dealing with things that are difficult. But I love the framing of it and that it's positive. So yes, I run CAYP Psychology, and CAYP Psychology offers assessments for ADHD for children and young people. And often, as part of that assessment, we are thinking about things that are difficult. What do you struggle with from family and friends and school and learning and relationships? And it's very easy to find that very overwhelming. But what our job is as psychologists is to be able to provide that understanding to then be able to help children and young people. And so if we can come to that understanding with a diagnosis or not, our aim is to say, you find this difficult, we want to provide an explanation why, but then provide the necessary support and recommendations to help with that. That can be extremely powerful for families. And we hear it. Many families come back to us and say, thank you so much. You're the first people to finally see what we've been saying for years. And our aim is to take a non-judgmental approach. That's not our job, but our job is to understand the difficulties that you or your family are facing so that we can provide that support. I find that exceptionally rewarding, which is why we do this job.
Fascinating, Dan. And thank you so much for the incredible work that you do.
Thank you.
I want to move the attention to your ADHD item,
yes.
Which for the eagle-eyed ADHD chatter viewers will think that what's in front of me is the regular table, but it's not. I'm going to reveal your ADHD item, Dan, which is underneath this cloth.
Okay.
Oh. It's a trampoline.
Now,
why does a trampoline represent ADHD?
Oh my gosh, I can't believe you brought this here. That's amazing. So on the note of a trampoline, when I first had children, I was given some advice by someone, and the advice was, buy the biggest trampoline that you've got the space for and that you can afford. And I'm like, what are you talking about, mate? And trust me, this is what you want to be doing. So we did. So we've got a mega trampoline in our garden. It fills the whole garden, but that was the space that we wanted to use. And it has been the most amazing thing for us to have in our house because our kids are on it all the time. So from a physical point of view, it keeps them busy.
Sure.
Absolutely it does. And that is the first thing that I've been thinking about when it comes to ADHD and that activity levels and doing something. But what I also really like about trampoline is the nature of movement, the ups and downs of it. Oh, see what I've done there? The ups and downs. But also the fact that it can be enjoyed by so many people. And when it comes to ADHD, we are very quick to say it's a problem, whereas actually it can actually be almost a superpower in a way. You can do things and see things that many other people can't do. And many people can access a trampoline. So my link there was, it represents this idea that everyone can access something, but it's exceptionally useful for someone who needs that space to be able to let out their energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, Dan, and a brilliant analogy. And I'm very excited to see you have a jump at the end of the episode.
If only you had a bigger one, you'd see forward rolls and flips and twizzles, but not today.
Really fascinating. Thank you very much, Dan. I want to do the ADHD agony aunt section just finally. The ADHD agony aunt is a washing machine because my item is a washing machine because I always leave my laundry in the machine, and I ask all my guests, do you leave your laundry in the machine?
Excellent. I try not to, but inevitably it does happen because life ends up taking over, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I have been using the Tiimo app, which is the sponsor of the show, and since then I've been getting a lot better. This week, Dan, in the washing machine of woes, someone has written in and asked, I have ADHD and I'm 45 years old. My childhood was troubled with dysfunctional parents. Do you think I need to heal my inner child or forget the past and just work on me as I am now and how to improve myself rather than finding someone to blame?
Gosh, that's a loaded question, isn't it? But look at that. I think that is an amazing summary of everything that we've spent some time thinking about today, thinking about how things are currently, but also looking back as to where those difficulties have come from. So if we use that iceberg analogy again, what we see on the surface is how that lady is managing in everyday life. But our job as psychologists is to see underneath. And if we can help her take those steps back and look through it gently and carefully, maybe it can bring about an understanding, bring about some support, bring about a way that she can then hopefully better interact with herself and also a family if she's got one, or the world around her. Working on yourself as you are now can work to an extent. And sometimes that's all we need. That is all we need to do. But sometimes it's helpful to take that step back and look back and to help overcome some of the challenges that we may have had or experience, to help better understand and develop a future bright way forwards.
Wow, amazing, Dan. Just like everything else in the episode, incredibly insightful. So thank you very much on behalf of the Washing Machine of Woes submission. Just finally, Dan, I want to deliver a letter that was written by the previous guest, where they wrote their 3 rules to live by. I'll pass this to you, and if you could kindly open it and read the previous guest's 3 rules to live by.
Oh gosh, wow. Number 1, value evidence-based research as much as lived experience. The second one is, if you see or hear something quoted as fact, check it against known evidence or research. And then the third one is, remember, you are not ADHD, you are you, and ADHD is part of you.
Yes, very true. Very insightful. 3 great rules.
I would absolutely agree with all 3 of those. A psychologist by nature is based on critical thinking, and critical thinking comes from the evidence as well as people's lived experience. And that's not to undermine someone's individual circumstances, but it's to look at that big evidence base around it. And that's our job. And sometimes that means someone's individual experience clashes with that. That doesn't mean someone's wrong or disordered or anything like that. It just means that they might have a bit of a different path, and that's okay. And our job is to try to support it. And I particularly like the last one. You are not ADHD. ADHD is a part of you. It shouldn't define you. It is you are a child who has, or an adult who has ADHD, but you are not ADHD. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Dan, thank you so much. On behalf of every child who has ever felt different, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.